Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. And I am your host, Tracy Stuckrath, founder of the podcast, as well as Thrive Meetings and Events. And on this show, I talk to experts in all facets of food and beverage, culture and service style and food allergies and doctors and chefs and farmers, etc. And today, and I am actually live today from, where am I? I am in Texas, Round Rock, Texas, outside of Austin. And my guest is in my home state, North Carolina, Chef Keith Rhodes, and he is the owner of Catch Restaurant Group out of Wilmington, North Carolina. And I had the opportunity to interview him a couple of months ago for an article on coastal Carolina cuisine. And we had a great conversation on the phone. So I'm excited to have him and introduce him to you here on the show. So hello, Chef. How are you?
Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's nice to be here with you this morning or this afternoon, Tracy. I'm so excited to be here and to meet your audience and just talk a little bit about food and wellness and life.
Well, good. And I reached out to you originally because it's Diabetes Awareness Month. And when we chatted, I don't even know how we got on the conversation of sweet tea, but we did. And I said, you and my mom would get along great because my mom loves her sweet tea, but she needs to reduce her amount of sugar. And you're like, well, I'm a diabetic and this is what I do with that splash of sweet on top of the regular. And I thought that was hysterical.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I don't think that always we should deprive ourselves of life. Everything is good with moderation. We also have to be tuned into our own bodies as well to know what we can do and what we can't do.
Well, and with that sweet, exactly. And she was drinking that sweet tea with 49 grams of sugar every single day. And I'm like, we got to cut that in half. I did get her to cut it in half, which is great.
That's a good thing.
Yes. So when I'm going to jump to what I originally planned us talking about, to what we were talking about just before we got on the show, because you just got back from the Bay Haven Food and Wine Festival in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I, to be honest with you, didn't really know that it was specifically about Black food culture. And I love that because I also was reading and listening to the video that you did for the North Carolina Rice Festival. Was it?
Yes.
And talking about the foodways. And one of the quotes that I love from you there was that, I typed it in here. Cooking good food from the soul, and that you felt obligated to cook this and take it to a higher level. And I love that, looking at the culture of the food and where it came from and what you're doing. So can you talk a little bit about the food festival and I'm going to say it wrong, the Gullah, do I say that? Gullah Geechee? Gullah Geechee cuisine.
Yeah. So just really quickly, and we'll touch base on the Bay Haven Food and Wine Festival that went on this past weekend in Charlotte. And it was a 3-day event in Charlotte, just really focused in on Black food excellence and Black food ways. And we'll talk a little bit about culture. When we were there, we had different types of workshops where we talked about and demoed vegan soul food, coastal soul food, coastal cuisine. We also highlighted different mixologists from around the area throughout the South. We had folks from Atlanta in the house. We had folks from Charleston in the house making really great cocktails. This was the first of its kind of a large festival that was primarily focused on Black food excellence and hospitality. They had two very big dinners, one Friday night and one Saturday night, each for 250 people, about 6 courses each dinner. They had a food truck carnival that kind of kicked off the weekend on Friday before the dinner. Again, satellite locations where you can enjoy Black winemakers, Black cocktails, and just the whole vibe and story of people coming together behind Black. Saturday was a lot more of the demos and workshops. We had a really big dinner that I was a part of that particular evening. Sunday transitioned into a whole cow that they barbecued for a barbecue brunch that they did. And it was just a great weekend. Professionals from all around the United States that flew in, and so did attendees for this particular. It was very monumental. And I really want to send a special shout out to Greg and Sabrina Collier for planting the seed and the idea of having something like this. Greg is the former owner of the Yoke restaurant in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and he is the owner of Leah and Louise restaurant in Charlotte, North Carolina. And that couple does a lot in the particular area of creating Black food awareness about culture. They do it on a really high level. And I'm just privileged to be surrounded with their energy when I'm there in Charlotte, because they're doing a lot to promote Black food excellence. And that is very important, that not only with their work with keeping folks aware of that, but obtaining the sponsors who all jumped on board to help make this dream a reality they call the Bay Haven Food and Wine Festival. And part of their success was Cisco, U.S. Foods, the Big Green Egg, Inland Seafood, and so many, Novant Health, and everybody sharing in that dream and making that dream manifest into the Bay Haven Food and Wine Festival. And all the dedicated chefs that came and were involved with this anticipate this growing into something really big. The whole weekend was totally sold out before the event started on that Friday. So there were no tickets to be sold on site. And that is a testament of how this gathering has been needed for so long in our particular area. And I often say, I think right now we are in the middle of Black Renaissance Part 2, where we're coming together as a nation. And I think folks are really valuing their neighbors and the folks that have been here, not just Black folks, but people of color in general, people from different genres. And it's just a great time to be an American here in the United States. And I'm just so privileged to have been a part of that and share my input on coastal cuisine, being Black and growing up with type 1 diabetes and all of these kind of things, and just making folks feel aware, and just honored to be a Black person or Black American.
That's awesome. And I'm looking at the talent list, which I just posted, and some of my friends from when my time living in Atlanta, Jennifer Hill Booker and Dwayne Nutter and Matthew Rayford, Shafarmer, and Todd Richards. I mean, great lineup from the people that I know from Atlanta. 10 years, I left 4 years ago. So that's a great lineup. To tie that into, again, that video that you did, it's generations of food history. And one of the other women in the video, I don't remember her name, but she had a beautiful apron on with a bunch of different characters on it. But she was saying, we've got to teach this food culture to our children so that they can continue to pass it. And I think we're talking about, we've got to preserve this and know this and share it as well. So can you tell a little bit about that, Gullah?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Gullah people are a tribe that came from West Africa and migrated to that eastern southern part of the United States. They came up through the Caribbean and kind of settled right there in that Charleston, lower part of Georgia area. But a lot of the folks migrated right up into North Carolina as well, what we call the Gullah Geechee corridor. And so with them, they brought West African traditions such as planting rice, fishing, and farming, and different things like that. Part of the culture was rice cultivation. And when we think about rice being cultivated in North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia, mainly those were cash crops, just like tobacco and cotton. And you can imagine being forced to do something, forced to wash dishes every night at home as a child. So when you got older, the first thing you did was buy a dishwasher so you didn't have to do that anymore. Well, when the slaves were emancipated and slaves were freed, then rice cultivation became very bad. No one wanted to go out and be forced to do this, and all the hardships and weather and inclement things that would happen. So rice left North Carolina, and that was tragic. And we think about the Confederate War and things like that. No matter what history may have told us, we know that was a money behind economics, because the South was losing a lot of the economics that had made them strong for a while. And rice was definitely an export that came out of the South. But part of that story is making sure that we talk a little bit more about the Gullah people, because in that particular area, land has been seized, culture has been uprooted, stories are trying to be told to keep the connection of where we came from and our importance here and our contributions here on the coast. The Gullah people survived on the coast by fishing, eating within their means. So just little woods hunting, from squirrels to raccoons, eating lots of shrimp and oysters, and light farming. We really didn't associate cooking pigs and barbecue and things like that with coastal African Americans. That was a little bit more inland, where you were away from a lot of the seafood and different things like that. But part of their whole mantra is making sure that the story is told, the legacy is told, and it's told for future generations, where we're living in a time of social media where things move so quickly from day to day that things are very forgotten. And it's very important. And we often have those times that resonate deeply with us about the importance of history and ties and family ties as we tend to get a little bit older. Looking for a connection, reflecting back on good times when we were young with our elders. And we look for those comfort things that can take us back. And so it's important that we share those stories with our young people today and remind a lot of the folks that are here today about the journeys that our people came or our people experienced through their travels from Africa, through the Caribbean to the United States, and how that story reflects through food as well. And so that's just really a part of what we do. And I'll tell you, my inspiration for a lot of the food that I cook here with Catch Restaurant especially came from my food ways with my grandfather. My grandfather was not a professional chef or a chef at all. He really kind of believed a lot of that farm to table type of cooking. He didn't have a farm, but he had a nice garden in the back. And in the summertime, there were plenty of tomatoes and cucumbers on the table. I grew up a vegetarian, so folks will know by religious reasons, was a Seventh-day Adventist. And so when I decided I wanted to be a chef when I was about 16 or 17 years old, my world opened up a lot, because I had never been exposed to meat products or anything like that. I never ate anything of that sort. And so I grew up with beets on the table, eating oatmeal for breakfast, drinking aloe vera in the mornings, just not the atypical thing that you will associate with a young Black African American growing up in the South. It was very different. But I didn't know anything else different. And I remember starting to work into the kitchens. My mother was a nurse, and she was super holistic about everything. And when I would go into these kitchens and work in these kitchens, and I would see them roasting meats and making rich sauces of gravies and demi-glosses and heavy cream reductions, I almost just questioned if this is what I wanted to do, because it was something I had to adapt to. And the only reason I decided that I wanted to be a chef was because my grandfather had retired from off of the railroad. And these are my paternal grandparents, had settled right close to Figure 8 Island here in Wilmington.
Okay.
And my mother ended up passing away when I was about 14 years old. She had a brain aneurysm. And so my grandparents they were retired. And they took my sister and I in. It was just my sister and I. We were about 13 and 14 years old when this happened. And my grandparents we were very privileged to have them in our lives. They were very established folks, very educated folks. They provided us with great shelter and love. And it was different because my grandmother was a really big entertainer. She liked host parties at home, and my grandfather liked to go play golf. This is just something that most folks would not equate to Black families at this particular time. And I'll just say that throughout that journey right there, my grandmother was not a great cook at all. She couldn't cook. My grandfather prepared a lot of the meals. And I'll just say, growing up with them, and I'll kind of keep on this narrative because it was very much how I grew up. But things like eating fried chicken, I don't ever remember eating that. Maybe fish a little bit more than anything. And holidays, my grandfather would do a small ham or something like that. But seafood was very important to us then. And as my grandfather got older and my grandmother passed away, and just being with him, heart disease became prevalent. That was something that my grandfather was struggling with. And he was just a small frame man. He wasn't overweight or anything like that. He wasn't an alcoholic, didn't smoke, he liked to have this piece of Nisi sausage in the morning for breakfast and some grits and eggs and coffee, just like most of the folks of that genre. About 80 years old, he's developing some heart disease issues. And it made me a little bit more conscious being able to spend the last few years with him and just being that close to him. He was just like my father about how I was moving in life. I was introduced into the restaurant and working in the restaurant. And one day I was working in the restaurant and I was cooking, and I didn't feel too good. And I said, wow, I'm not feeling really good right now. And I just started feeling real clammy, sweating a lot. And so I walked outside, and I guess maybe about this time I might have been about 16 years old, 17 years old. And my boss came outside and he said, hey, man, you said, you're not looking too good. And I said, I'm not feeling too good. He said, we're going to take you to the hospital. And I got to the hospital, and I never forget the folks that said that my blood sugar was like 550, something crazy.
Wow.
And they were like, did you know that you have diabetes? And I at that time, it was something that was, I didn't know. But things were happening to me leading up to that point that I knew something was wrong. But part of African-American culture is you avoid the doctor. You don't go regularly like you should unless it's an emergency. Right. So very early on, maintenance is very important for me. Some of the things, as I reflected back at that particular time, leading up to that one moment that I was suffering with, I look back now and I just think about how important it is to take care of ourselves and be conscious of ourselves when something is going on within our bodies, that we look at it and try to figure that out. One of the biggest problems I had when I was young was I had bladder issues. And so one of the things I would do all the time was wet the bed when I was very young. Okay. And so I'm going to show you a quick timeline of things that happened that were not addressed. And then it ultimately came to a head at that particular moment at the restaurant. When I was young, one of the things that would happen when I'd say 7, 8, in that kind of time frame, I would always wet the bed at night. And so my parents thought that, okay, well, maybe he doesn't need to have anything to drink before he goes to bed because he's wetting the bed. But what was happening was I would wake up in the middle of the night and go in the bathroom and cut the water on at the sink and drink so much water and go back to bed because my body was dehydrated.
Right.
Because I needed that water. And so that was what was happening to me quite often. And then there were times where I might pass out somewhere. I might eat some food for lunch or dinner and just pass out. We look at what was happening there. I was having these sugar spikes when I was young. They didn't understand. They just thought, hey, he's just growing phase, wet in the bed, blah, blah, blah. And again, I share these stories for parents who might have children who have issues like that, where to not just chalk it up as growing issues and growing cycles. Hey, take them to the doctor. You really never know what could be going on. I would have to wake up sometimes. I would be laying there. I would never forget. And I could almost feel myself beginning to use the bathroom and jump up out of the bed and run to the bathroom. But leading up, fast forward into my teens, what happened when I was about 16-ish, let's say that 16 to 18 year model, right before I was taken to the hospital from work and found out about diabetes, I started getting really thirsty all the time. And so I would drink these like quart cups of water all the time. Right. And as soon as I would drink that cup of water, within an hour, I was right in the bathroom urinating. And that cycle just repeated and repeated. And so now I'm losing weight because I'm taking more water weight in and not eating enough food. Then the next thing that would happen, that started to happen, was my vision. Now, this is this early in the game.
Wow.
My vision I'd started seeing double. And so I would have to, sometimes I never would tell anybody because I was scared. I didn't know what was happening. I would keep one eye closed sometimes and look through one eye so I could just see regularly because my sugars were so elevated. When I would look out of both eyes, I would just see double. Okay.
Wow.
Once I went to the hospital and got treated, and we kind of worked out insulin intake and diet, all of those symptoms began to subside.
Gotcha.
And then I became focused in on where did this come from?
Right.
And then I remembered both of my grandmothers, both had diabetes, both were insulin dependent. One of my grandmothers, my paternal grandmother who had taken us in, I just never forget every night growing up with her. And even when we were young and we would sleep in the bed with my grandma and everything, I just remember in her room, as you walked into the bathroom, she always had a glass of ice water that sat on a tray as you walked into her bathroom. She would get thirsty and she needed that ice water. But when we were young, we were often given, if I was with one grandmother one weekend, she'd say, go get my medicine from out of the refrigerator. And we were giving them injections in the arm. And it was just really strange because they were both loving and kind and the best people and professionals. My grandmother was one of my grandmothers was a principal, an English major. And so these were professional folks that should have known a little better about how health-wise and how to take care. But life has a series of ways of kind of prioritizing at that moment what's important. Right. And as I got older and I thought about it, and I was like, wow, both my grandmas worked 9 to 5 per se. One was in retirement, but exercise was not even a factor in anything that they did. And from time to time, they ate whatever they wanted to.
Right.
My maternal
now,
grandmother.
How did that? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying my maternal grandmother, she tended to indulge in cocktails a bit more than she should have. And so that was not good with the formula of diabetes at all.
Right.
Alcohol turning to sugar. And
how did that go, starting to cook and watch them and seeing your grandfather, even with the heart disease, did that change the way that you cook?
I think at that moment in life, when I was in my 20s, it made me a bit more conscious about food. I think that growing up with my mother and a lot of what she tried to instill in us about wellness and eating healthy became a bit more important. And that seed had been planted inside of me and in my heart. And so it was something that always called me to go back to that. Okay. And especially after losing my grandfather to that, it really called me, and it's always been with me. It's been like a memory or a song that's always in the back of my head, and I can never forget just our life growing up with her, and how much wellness meant to her, and how much it still just rings clear for me today.
Well, that's good that still rings true to you today and that you still see that. Now, do you, when you're cooking, and I want to talk about some of the food that you're cooking in the restaurant, because it's called Catch and North Carolina coastal cuisine, and you were talking about crab picking in there. And I'm a Maryland girl, so grew up on picking Maryland blue crabs, or North Carolina blue crabs now. But how do you, and actually one of the quotes that you said in that video too was soul foods, it's long-term heart comfort, but it's not necessarily the healthiest food that you've eaten. So have you taken the food that you grew up with and made it healthier, but still so delicious with the thought process from your history?
Yeah, I think that growing up for us, and again, I would just say, I have evolved the food that's associated with Black culture and Southern Black culture, and kind of presented it through a different lens now.
Okay.
I can't per se that my journey and my story was so much self-indulgent with lots of cakes and fried foods and stewed pork greens and things like that. It would be unfair for me to claim that as part of what I did and what I enjoyed growing up. But I was definitely surrounded by that. And for myself, it has always been about minimizing those things and presenting food in a healthier, more exciting, more adventurous overtone than what we are customarily associated to thinking about Southern Black food. And we also have to pay homage and respect that to some degree, because we can only respect that and honor that to get to the next level of where we should be. Much like the Bay Haven Food and Wine Festival. We are at a place now where that is very important, to acknowledge Black contributions, Black history, Black culinary foodways. Now it's very important to do that, but we also have to acknowledge the fact that that had not been done for a long time. Okay. And our representation has not been acknowledged in the light that it should. Okay. Right. And so given the food that we were given to eat at that particular time, very inexpensive, unquality cut foods. And I do have a degree in nutrition as well. Food is very important to me. Food and religion has been very important to me. And so we won't get very deep into different things, but with health and with food, and a lot of this is because we are Americans. Right. It is very hard to have a 360 approach to food. It doesn't matter whether you're a vegan, vegetarian, or whatever. There are just certain things that we can't cover every base. So when we're vegan, and we're cutting out animal fats and animal contributions to the diet, then we know that most of our fats, and we know that 100% of cholesterol comes from animal fats.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
And so when we acknowledge that and we make those changes, we also understand the benefits of what that can do for our bodies. But on the second side of that, understanding digestion and the foods that we eat, like kale, collards, cabbage, dry beans, and different things like that, they're not very good for our digestive system as well. And so so we pick and choose our battles, and we try to be as wise as we can when we're preparing food to consume, really based on an individual basis and our health and what we want to achieve in life. If you're a runner, if you're a weightlifter, if you're a swimmer, a football player, or if you are someone who is trying to lose weight, all of these different things kind of play a fact in what we're achieving and our goals personally. But moving from traditional foods like collard greens, cooked with fatback, dry beans, cooked with salted meats, there's a respect that we give those particular foods because in the early 1900s, in the 1800s, there was no refrigeration.
Right.
So most of the folks, the food that was given had to be salted, had to be dried, it had to be brought back in some sort of stew. Most of the folks ate very organically. Most of the folks ate very seasonally. We had to. We didn't have grapes coming in from Chile, bananas coming in at that particular time. So what was grown in the fields is what the people ate. And as per usual, the plantation owner or the sharecrop provider always ate the best of what it was. Right. They ate the ribeye steak and you ate the tips. So they ate the quality pork chops and those cuts while you ate the chitlins, the feet, and the ears. You know, right. And if you could imagine how that particular food, cornbread, lots of starches and carbs and things like that, we're not just talking about physical fitness when we're talking about food and food of that time and how they would have these dry biscuits that they would take out into the field and be able to snack on these things to give them the carbs and the energy they needed to pick all this cotton during the day. But that food did not contribute very well to mental health as well. After generations and generations of ingesting those type of foods, we find now that certain races are more prone to certain illnesses and complications than other races. It's genetics now because it had happened for so many generations. So part of acknowledging all of that and knowing all of that and how do I bridge that gap from traditional foods to what we do now, we still serve lots of grits. We still serve Carolina Gold rice. We still prepare lots of fish and seafood and things like that. When I first started cooking, it was very much about me and what I wanted to say through food. Okay. And I think that I've spoke so loud and people have heard my voice so much and early in my career that it was easy for me to, and say, you know what? I think I've been heard. Let me fall back for a minute and listen to my customers and give them a little bit of what they want. So they know what I stand for, but I think they can understand that I am a people chef. So I'm no good. The chef is no good without any customers or any friends sitting at the table. Very early in my career, I never cooked with demi-glace. I very rarely ever cooked with heavy cream. Bacon was not on any of my menus when I cooked. This was all the way up until probably when I was in my 30s. And then I kind of said, enough of this. Let me go ahead and give some of the people what they want. And so we integrated. I do a crab gravy or something like that. And then if I served a steak, I would do it with demi-glace, just traditional foods that kind of bridge that gap with folks. But before I catch restaurant, and I would associate that with more being a pescatarian restaurant, lots of vegetables and seafood. My whole idea was to open up a vegetarian restaurant.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
that was it. That's all I wanted to do. Again, that was where I came from.
Right.
And that's what I wanted to do. That was the plan. And then as I kind of wrote my business plan and assessed the market here, I began to find out that most of the vegetarian food offerings were tied in with retail, health food sales, vitamins, and things like
Right.
that. And then maybe they had a little cafe on the side. And I was very young and inexperienced in retail side. And so I said, well, I've got to get something that's the next best thing. And the pescatarian concept really kind of resonated hard with me because, again, local, fresh, healthier approach than what barbecue and lots of fried seafood and things that are associated with my particular area. And we dove in deep with that. And one of the main dishes that I serve right now is a variant on fish and grits.
Okay.
And that is something that really, once I started eating meat when I was young, meat meaning even seafood, that was something that my grandfather would always cook. It was like fried spice, grits, and sliced tomatoes.
Oh, that sounds delicious.
And we would have that very often, or fried flounder with grits. We didn't eat a lot of rice growing up. And like I said, beets were always on the table, green beans. I remember him getting Spanish mackerel fillets. And he would take these Spanish mackerel fillets and lay them out on a pan and put Hellman's mayonnaise on the top and lemon juice and broil them in the oven.
My dad does that.
And bring them out. My grandfather was also the kind of guy who would, and I never forget this, and it touches me right now as I think about it, for breakfast in the morning. And we were that kind of family. We had breakfast together. We sat down and had dinner in the evenings, that kind of thing. And I never forget, my granddad would take the grapefruits and slice them in half. He would segment out the grapefruits, and we would either have them with a little bit of sugar on the top, and every now and then he would put the cinnamon and the sugar on them and broil them in the ovens. And we had that perforated grapefruit spoon that we would use to get down in the head, just like a little cup on the end of it. But so eating healthier and more conscious was something that I was around. And so my thoughts towards food was, how do I present this food familiar, but also present it more exciting and a bit healthier? And so now we have a part on the menu where we do traditional fried seafood as well. Okay. For those folks that want that experience, we have that. But the gist of what we offer here is sauteed, grilled, broiled seafood, not hardly anything breaded, more vegetable, seafood, protein kind of layered foods, as opposed to the meat and three with a starch vegetable kind of thing. We don't always need those starches, and I think our food kind of reflects that a lot. We don't need rich animal-based sauces to make food successful. Vinaigrettes are something that, and vegetable purees and fruit purees or coulis and things like that are things we use to kind of like highlight food in even its simplest form. And I think that educating folks on things like that is what we do best, giving people ideas and just sparking, I want to go home and cook this. We use a lot of indigenous ingredients, clams, oysters, crabs, and all those kind of things. And I'm one of those kind of guys who's out always. My daughter's a Muslim, or practicing Muslim, so she doesn't eat pork or things like that. And I'm always kidding with her all the time. I'm like, why you won't eat bacon, but you'll sit there and you'll eat a lobster or you'll eat shrimp or something like that. It's so funny to me that we're so used to following tradition per se without understanding the relevance of that tradition at that particular time and how those kind of ideals were associated with things of that particular time and how we've evolved as a society. Food has evolved. Yesterday's pork is not today's pork. The DNA of the animal is not even the same of what it was. And when we think of scripture and how this food is unclean or that is unclean. In the grand scheme of it, most food that comes from out of the ocean technically is not as clean as what a pig would eat today, believe it or not.
Wow.
You know?
Well, and I just bring the new law that's coming down into California, Proposition 12, that's saying the state will not allow any kind of pork into the state unless it adheres to animal welfare practices based on certain parameters. So even if it's coming from Iowa or North Carolina, if it doesn't have if the pigs don't have the space to live, then it can't come into the state of California. So that's a whole nother conversation to have.
And that's a great idea and ideal to make sure as a community we are even safer in consuming animal products. And I think one of our things here in North Carolina, and it's not just being a chef to cook and create food, it's a chef to create awareness that we keep certain foods and keep certain things together for future generations. And part of my success is being able to highlight local seafood, locally sourced seafood, locally grown vegetables as well. And part of that success is making sure that our waters are pristine as well. And so it's very important that we are conscious of environmental factors that contribute to our water quality and water wellness, being aware of things like Gen X and things like that, being concerned about oil and offshore drilling and water power and windmills and different things like that that can affect our ecosystems and our aquaculture here, where so many of us just depend on that for a living, whether we're recreational fishermen or all of those kind of things. And or even if you're just fishing out of the Cape Fear. Just did a video in collaboration with Duke University, Stop, Check, and Enjoy, where we're talking about folks that are fishing out of the Cape Fear River, and they don't really understand the right fish to source out of the river and how to prepare those fish for consumption the best way. And traditionally, most of the folks that are out there, they're catching those fish, they're scaling those fish, they're going into the frying pan, and they're probably eating them with some grits and enjoying dinner. And not just that one individual, but probably a community of some sort, a family or something. And we need for them to understand the best way to consume those particular fish would be removing the skin, would be broiling that fish or grilling that fish, where that fish can release some of that intermuscular fat, where some of those river toxins might be trapped in. And that video is very important because a lot of folks eat their living out of the Cape Fear River and other rivers. And so, again, I'm so privileged to be where I am here in Eastern North Carolina and to still be valued in the community as a chef, not only with a talent for cooking, but hopefully with a talent for educating our community as well on wellness when it comes to food and preparing food and thinking about different ways to approach food at different points in our life.
Oh my gosh, you are so brilliant. And I am blown away by all the knowledge that you have. And I love it. And I love what you're doing. And I know I wish we had more time to chat because we're at 48 minutes right now. Wow. And because I want to also, touch on how you give back to the community as well. And you've said the word community a couple of times, and food makes community, right? The cultural community and what you're doing with your restaurant brings community. So I think we can have a whole nother conversation on that. Are you all right with that?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that my wife and I, Angela Rhodes, my wife for 30 plus years, and my staff here at Catch Restaurant, one of the things that we really kind of pride ourselves in doing is creating community awareness with folks that are in need of a good meal, in need of education on how to prepare those meals, I work with so many agencies here in Eastern North Carolina, the Food Bank, UNCW. We partnered with social services. We partnered with Feast Down East.
Mm-hmm.
We are partnering now with Northside Food Co-op to bring hot quality meals in a grocery store, a pilot grocery store, into the north side area of Wilmington, North Carolina. That is happening right now as we speak, just to provide meals at everyday price point and healthy meals to a community that has been historically marginalized from having access to food like they should. For us, the community, I might be a talented chef, but my success and longevity in this community is due to my community. And I think that for us, ultimately, it's always about giving back to the community, and not just giving back hamburgers and hot dogs, but making sure that we're providing the food that kind of nurtures the soul per se, and also spending the money in the community as well to keep that money in circulation. A lot of the folks that I deal with are just like me. We don't drive Rolls Royces and Bentleys. We're everyday people that work hard every day. And so when I'm serving butter beans on my menu, I'm getting them from Goldsboro, from Carolina butter beans. When I'm sourcing my produce, I'm buying it from Feast Down East, or I have local farmers that come right to my door. This money's going right back into the community. And I'll tell you about all of those folks that I deal with when they have crops like Port City Produce here in Wilmington, and like U.S. Foods and other places that are here, when they have crops or they have food that may be getting ready to meet their non-quality checkpoints, we take in all of that upcycled food and we refurbish that food and make meals to go back into the community for free, or as a pay as you can, or as you pay as you can type of approach. And we do that through Northside Food Co-op. And so part of that is being able to inspire young folks with so much more energy than we have to get out and to make sure that no kid is hungry, that no family or no elderly person in our community is longing for a nutritious meal, to be conscious that maybe some of those folks, those young people, or some of those elderly folks, or some regular folks might not be able to cook a meal. So having that meal prepared where they can just microwave that meal. Going out into public housing communities at rec centers and showing the kids how we plant seeds of carrots and radishes and collards and Swiss chard, and coming back weeks later or months later, we harvest it and make quality food. When you know that they are from homes with single moms or single dads that are working multiple jobs, trying to go to school and doing so much where, you know, that McDonald's dollar hamburger or that Hot Pocket is really convenient. It's really easy on the pocket. But we also know that's not the type of food that we want our young folks or even our grown folks ingesting on a regular basis. You know, and so that's what we're doing. And it's a team effort, not just me here at Catch Restaurant, but it's everybody in this community that makes it happen. It's folks like you who take a slice out of your big pie to allow us to have a voice, to share what's going on here in our community in North Carolina and what's happening.
Well, thank you for all of that you do, because food has so many different avenues that it can take, but coming back down to it, it is that community and it is our culture, our food culture. So thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. And my listeners, my friend David posted a comment, said, insightful historical information about how certain foods became associated with the African American community. Thank you for sharing. And I love that. So I appreciate everything that you do. And I need to get my butt in my car and drive an hour and a half and come eat in Wilmington and eat at Catch. You'll see me before the end of the year. How's that?
You know what? It is a pleasure. Just seeing you right now is enough. But God willing, we'll be here. And thank you for giving us a little bit of airplay here and letting folks know about what we're doing here in the community. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Thank you, Keith, so much. All right. You have a fantastic day. And everybody, thank you for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. We just listened to Chef Keith Rhodes of Catch Restaurant in Wilmington, North Carolina. He is James Beard Award nominated chef. He is committed to the community and committed to the Coastal Carolina cuisine and just the food culture. So thank you for listening to him. And until next time, stay safe and eat well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.